We've been identifying suitable goals for ourselves. Just as important, we've been making an inventory of the strengths we already have, which will help us reach these goals. The question is, what kind of program shall we organize for ourselves? How do we get from where we are to where we want to go? By now, it should be clear to you that we need something to prod us, to move us along, through the program we devise. We're talking about what psychologists call motivation. Perhaps before we think of designing programs that lead to goals, we should know what we're talking about when we use the term motivation. Dr. Goldiamond had something to say about what we call observable motives.
Dr. Goldiamond, the last time that we met, we talked about the first three parts of the big question. The big question being, where do we go from here? We've now come to the fourth part, and what is probably the most difficult. How do we keep the person going through the program, help them along? Aren't we really talking about motivation here?
We are talking about motivation, but the trouble with the word motivation is that it's considered something sort of deep within the person, and then we don't know how to handle it. It's a big puzzle always. How do we motivate somebody? How do we tap that which is within? Mm-hmm. Now, I recall in the book, that wonderful children's classic, The Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz admitted he was a phony, but nobody believed him. And the Cowardly Lion, wanted courage, mm-hmm. And the Wizard of Oz was finally back down. He roared at the Wizard of Oz, saying, "I want courage." And so what the Wizard of Oz did was take a great big bottle, and he poured it into a little saucer. And the Cowardly Lion said, "What's that?" And the Wizard of Oz says, "That's courage. Courage is inside you. When you drink that up, mm-hmm. you will be courageous." So the lion went down, lapped up the courage, and then he went, "Rah!" And now he was courageous again. Mm-hmm. Now, he had been courageous all the way before. He was courageous in stating his demands to the Wizard of Oz and backing them up. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the Wizard of Oz was a phony. He said so, but nobody would believe him. Right. So he put that within. I don't like that word, motivation, of things within. Certainly we all feel motivated. We feel things. But the question now is, what other reference, what's going on that we talk about when we talk about somebody being motivated?
Well, I guess that motivation doesn't have to mean doing something. It can also mean you can be motivated to do nothing. So, in other words, it could be more productive to look at the observables, the visibles, which, quote, motivate, end of quote, people.
That's right. Now, we do have some very good terms in the vocabulary for that. One word is incentive. Mm-hmm. What is the incentive? And this is sort of like a parallel track, two parallel lines. You have the incentives on the outside, corresponding to, quote, motives. Yes. On the inside, if you say somebody is motivated by food, that is, he's hungry, you can say the incentive, food, will produce all kinds of effort on his part, which will include doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. It's reaching through toward that.
Toward that. If we say somebody is, the incentive is money, well, the way to look at it inside is that this guy is motivated by greed. That's the motivation. Mm-hmm. So these are two different ways of basically talking about the same sets of relationships. Mm-hmm. Now, we were on courage on the Wizard of Oz, and I think of the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is given out for bravery above and beyond the call of duty. Mm-hmm. Now, supposing the guy does something absolutely way beyond the call of duty, and his knees were shaking as he did it. Mm-hmm. Or supposing the guy was stewed as he did it. Does that alter the fact that he deserves the medal?
So we don't really have to know. Did Audie Murphy just want to get the heck out of there, and that's why he got more medals than anybody else in World War II? We're talking about the consequences as the external motivators. The reaching and giving them that little bit of success and energy each time to make the next step possible, instead of saying, it's out there, go get it, tiger, and
Sink
letting
or
them run.
Swim.
Mm-hmm. Making them run when they are just feeling comfortable with crawling.
Yeah. And this occurs all the way through. You've heard this classic statement, of course, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
I have a feeling it's not going to be a classic statement anymore in a few minutes.
Well, I would submit to you is that that statement, which talks about how all the appropriate arrangements can be made, but we somehow can't motivate the organism to respond then, let me submit that that statement is categorically false. We can bring a horse to water, and we can make him drink if we make him thirsty first.
And I believe there are several ways we could think of to do that.
Oh yes, he can run around in the sun, and then he'll be quite eager to get at that water, be, quote, highly motivated.
Yes.
We on our own can put big salt licks there.
This is not an easy question to deal with. Just what is motivation? It can be many things. But in designing a program, let's use the observables. Call them incentives or consequences if you like. These motivators will prove to be of greatest importance as we pursue distant goals, ones far away from where we are now. No matter how much we may desire distant goals, discouragement may kill the desire and the hope. You must keep your eye on important consequences. These will serve as incentives along the way. The ideal program skirts discouragement by building in significant consequences at points where it's necessary to nudge the person along. Now, how about getting down to cases?
Aren't the distant goals, the far-off goals, very discouraging and disgusting at times? What do we do about helping those people over the humps? I would think if something was too far away, I'd eventually say, hey, forget it. It's much easier to resort to whatever I was doing before.
Well, sometimes you can't even do what you were doing before. For example, when somebody has a spinal injury or is hospitalized for something else, suddenly that which he had been doing before is now seemingly gone. Well, in that particular case, that can be made into a long-range goal. If he was interested in it before, that can become a long-range goal. And now we then make the long goal, break it down into shorter goals, and gradually start to work on these and set it up step by step by step so the person can get to do that which he had been doing before, and all that the accident does is put it further out in the distance. And now, of course, this being further out in the distance also occurs for other problems as well, in which it wasn't taken away from you by some accident. And so the trick of it then is to take the long goal and break it into shorter ones, which are attainable. And in that case, when you do that, quote, the depression lifteth.
I would think it would be very difficult to build in those consequences. What is the incentive for being a waitress besides the money? I mean, do people like it? What is the incentive for the coal miner, the assembly line worker? Jobs that are dull, that are tedious, that can be harmful with the industrial pollutants, and that are boring and frustrating, where there's no mental change of activity. There's just this one thin line that goes through everything. How do you get them psyched?
Well, you may not necessarily get them psyched on this, but there are ways of doing this. There are certain consequences, of course, which are not intrinsic to the program the person wants, you know, like learning for the sake of learning, getting ahead, and so on. We're all familiar to things that we do, which we do because the goals are goals of our own making, and goals which are thoroughly in line with our interests and backgrounds. That kind of program, or that kind of system of consequences, you know, has been called kind of intrinsic consequences. They're, quote, within, but they need not be within. The programmer can arrange them so the person gradually gets closer and closer and closer to where it is he wants to go. But the kind of consequences you're talking about have been called extrinsic consequences. They're not related to the activity of the program. Like, for example, money. And this kind, or how you're going to keep them down on the farm, you know, after they've seen Paris. And there are ways to do this. Now, if society or somebody else desires some kind of effort very much, for example, steel. We know steel is extremely important to our economy, to our health, to our locomotion, to our pleasure, in every possible way. Yet getting the steel is an onerous activity, and you're not going to get too many people for whom getting the steel is the, you know, is really what they consider themselves put on earth for. You're not going to get too many people like this. Well, we do produce steel. What you then have to do is you have to attach extrinsic consequences to the necessary effort. And one example of an extrinsic consequence, of course, is money.
Cash.
Money. Cash. That's exactly right. Some behavior modification experiments, they've used tokens instead, point systems instead. Grades are extrinsic consequences.
Among other things.
Among other things.
Yes.
Words of praise are extrinsic consequences very often. There are a whole set of extrinsic consequences which simply have to be used, either because the system isn't ingenious enough to try to find out what consequences are in line with what the person is after, or it simply can't be done. Now, the nice thing, of course, is when you can attach extrinsic consequences to intrinsic consequences as well. If you can combine them, sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot.
Well, I don't know if I understand this, so let me give an example that anyone who ever had parents can remember and relate to. I have lima beans, and perhaps I loathe lima beans, and Mother says one of several things. She can say, remember the starving children in Bangladesh in this generation. That's not really going to fire me up to eat the lima beans. She can say, they're good for you, and probably because I'm a child, I'll be a little contrary, and I'd say, I don't want to, what's so good about being good? Or she can say, all right, don't eat lima beans, no dessert. Then I'm going to say, guess I can have the lima beans.
Yeah.
Now, is that perhaps like the steel worker in a totally different level, that it's the money? It's not saying, we need that steel, it's good for your country.
That's right. That's
He wants the cash. I want the dessert.
Sometimes people will do the steel for the good of the country. It becomes quite important. In the Battle of Britain, for example, people worked long and hard hours to produce that steel. Then, at this point, just getting it as their work quotas were the thing. We're not engaged in such kind of a battle at the present moment. But this can be done. Barring that, I guess the mother's recourse, if somehow she can make the lima beans tasty.
Not likely.
Well, I don't know. We like lima beans at home, fixed appropriately. I'll give you our lima bean recipe one day.
It's a deal.
But
no Brussels sprouts. I refuse.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this depends on how you do that, too.
Okay.
But basically, sometimes you simply have to resort to these extrinsic consequences to get what may be in the person's own best interests, what are the best social interests, and so on. And I like to think in this context of Ogden Nash's poem, I could live my life in ease and insouciance were it not for making a living, which is rather a nuisance.
It's often possible to sprinkle important consequences at strategic points throughout the program. Thus, discouragement is kept at bay. Often, it's wise and easy to build extrinsic consequences, ones not related to the program. Money, for example, can be used to buy consequences which are important to each individual. Programs which cannot be built on intrinsic consequences may be designed with extrinsic incentives built in.
Well, now, I can't believe that you're suggesting that we should pay everyone for going through a program, or, hand out green stamps or something. So what happens?
Well, the green stamps are interesting, aren't they?
Yes.
They
Whole
say,
American phenomenon.
That's right. Buy at this store rather than
pay
at
more
that
money,
store.
but get those stamps.
Yeah. This is, however, sometimes often impractical. Money can't buy everything. It can't buy health. It can't buy a whole variety of things in life, which, quote, are the real interesting things in life. In that case, what we want to do is we want to know what are the effective consequences which work for a given individual. And we got to see those which work, and we must distinguish those which do work and those which are the effective consequences from those which he should be engaged in. We know that people should be preserving their health and they should not be smoking. People, should be doing this and should be doing that. We know this is what they should be. We know what consequences should be for them. But that's one issue. The problem is to engineer the shoulds in terms of that which is effective. What are the consequences which are effective for the individual, which might say are intrinsic to some kind of program you want to help develop with him?
Well, okay, I can think of a number of things that are very important to me, whether it would be to, say, eliminate them from my life or add them to my life, goals, whatever. A situation that I think would be pretty sticky is, how am I sure that you're talking about me, that you're talking about my individual case? I wouldn't think there'd be a way to say, all right, for all you people who want to quit smoking, that's it. For all you people who want to learn to parasail, you do it this way. It must be taken on a very individual basis, must it not?
Yes, there are a variety of ways to do this and to look at the individual and what it is that you observe that is worth using, which tells you what the person's own goals are.
Okay, do you have an example for me?
Well, certainly. Incidentally, none of these ways are infallible. We have to consider a whole range of them, which is what we're going to do. One way is to observe the person and see right now, what is the person doing enthusiastically? Or as the Kennedys used to say, with vigor. Okay? What is being done there? For example, there was one by Lloyd Harmey, who was a psychologist out in the West, which I think is beautiful. He and his colleagues were sent to observe a children's class which nobody could handle. It was really a mess. The kids were jumping around and screaming and throwing spitballs at each other. And
sounds like a great time.
Oh, yeah, they were having a real great time. That's it. Okay, now everybody had been trying to stop them. So Hamid said, well, if they're doing this with such vigor, kids love to run around. Look at recesses. They just run around like mad for this. Okay, let's use this as a consequence. The children's own behavior is telling us what they're after. Okay, let's make this the payoff in the program system. Well, how did he do that? Well, he walked in and said, stop. And instantly the kids stopped to see who this freak was. There he was, and then he said, go! And so they began to run around, scream, and so forth, and then he said, stop! And they all stopped. Waited a little bit more, and they looked at him, and he looked at them, and they grinned, and he grinned, and he said, go! And they all went at it. Well, what he did is he gradually extended that period. They waited for his hand to go up and come down and the like. And then he said, by the way, while we're at it, while we're waiting, why don't we do a little arithmetic in the meantime, and as soon as everybody's finished this little problem, which is going to take way less than you can think, or as they used to say, Jack Robinson, you can say it, then I will give the signal. And he began to do that. Then he said, as soon as everybody has finished, raise your hand. As soon as everybody has finished, then I'll do this. So the kids were all looking around to make, who's delaying them, to make sure that all hands went up. And gradually he began to extend this. After a while, he had the kids working eagerly for whole hours. And people coming in from the outside observing that class, had a statement, gee, this man is a tremendous disciplinarian. He must be sitting up there going, knock, knock, knock. And instead, he did nothing of the kind. Now, leaving aside these particular kids, one could look at other people's frameworks. For example, the job interviewer or the career counselor who asks, what are your hobbies? right, is asking what are those things which you do willingly and put a lot of effort in and invest a lot of time in, and this then might tell them what are the things which are important to you. Simply by observing what a person is doing, we can tell this.
It's trite but true. Money can't buy everything. For our purpose, this means that cash is not always a suitable reward. At times, the critical consequences themselves are the very rewards required. This means that consequences must be built into each step. We can't do this, however, until we know what consequences are important to us. How can we know what consequences we really regard as important? One way to do this is observe what someone does when he has free time. As for yourself, what do you like to do when you're not working or doing something for someone else? What do you enjoy? What makes you smile? This is the way to sort out important consequences. Dr. Goldiamond tells us about another procedure as he discusses a case he wants treated. Once you've heard about the case, you'll be aware of a crucial question to be asked. That is, what occurs immediately after a frequent behavior?
The case is that of a woman, aged 29, who a few years ago had married a widower with a son of 7, and came for help because she and the boy could simply not get along, and this was affecting her marriage. As we shall see, there were other problems as well. She wanted the child's behavior changed, but since we hadn't discussed things with him, our contract was to teach her a constructional approach to the boy. One of the problems was that every week on Friday,